Even though I've seen countless shorts on YouTube making fun of this game, to me, they were all without context, and I was able to experience this game with a fresh set of eyes. I've managed to amass quite a few hours playing the game, which I know pales in comparison to quite a lot of people, although I think I experienced a good portion of what the game has to offer, outside of the many different class builds that are possible. The really amazing thing about this game truly is the breadth of content that it offers. I'm going to spend some time talking about my experience with this game and its mechanics and hope you either gain some insight or at least enjoy my breakdown. So, without further ado, let's cross over into the realm of Cyrodiil and discuss the legendary meme generator, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion.
Okay, this was the one. I'm just as I'm sprinting, because last time I didn't get hit. Oh!
I may be mistaken, but I'm almost positive that Oblivion was the first truly open-world game that we had in my household, and I never had a chance to play it because my brother had the Xbox and I had the PlayStation. Unfortunately, nowadays, open world is basically the only format that games seem to release in. A while ago, I specifically started to avoid playing open world games because I was just experiencing genre fatigue. I got sick of climbing up towers and checking off pointless map marker icons just to get a collectible that added nothing to the game as a whole. Fortunately, I decided to play Oblivion and was pleasantly surprised to find that it is more of an RPG than the current formulaic open-world offerings that we get today. The player starts off with a character creator that is quite funny because the look of every character in Oblivion is good for a laugh. There are options to choose the player's race and birth sign they were born under that, on a first playthrough, didn't really provide enough information for me. I chose Wood Elf and the Thief mostly because I think Wood Elf was the least weird looking, and Thief because I knew lockpicking was a thing and not being able to open a treasure chest grates me immensely. That being said, I went into the game thinking I was going to try and be a sword and board, healing magic build, and both of these options were kind of junk for that style of play. I suppose if I had spent a bunch of time in the character creator, I could have inferred more information and chose better, so that bit is on me. While any character could go for any type of build theoretically, I would hazard a guess that certain race and birth sign combinations make significant differences with certain build types. Now onto the leveling system. Leveling also isn't very intuitive by my estimation.
I heard a rumor that you're an idiot. Any truth to that?
Now, this information may have been in the game's manual way back in the day when manuals were a thing, but since I'm playing a digital copy of the game, I was hoping to get that information in the actual game. While I might have been able to infer the intricacies of the system, it took a little research and help from a friend to truly understand it. The player gains skill ups when performing actions that correspond to the skill, then when a threshold is reached by leveling up the main skills that were determined by the character creation choices, the game informs the player to find a bed and sleep. When this is done, you have the option to level up base stats. Each of these stats can be increased from a range of 1 to 5 points. While I like that this allows for every playthrough to be a bit different, it's also a bit too random for me. This isn't me saying it's bad, just that I wish that it was a little less random so I could plan a bit more. There are pros and cons to this system, and I imagine it just comes down to personal preference. The gameplay is a mixed bag. I played on the Xbox One. I know, a filthy console pleb, which basically meant the third person was absolutely useless in my opinion, and riding a horse actually made movement harder than just walking manually. And the hardest boss in the game was the menu. I spent quite a bit of time in the menu, and whoever thought putting items that the player would use underneath the tab for keys was a good idea hopefully got fired. I had to put the Dawnstar and repair hammers on my hotbar because scrolling down with the controller past the 9,000 different keys every time was a bit annoying. The gameplay itself was fine, but it definitely shows its age. I went into combat swinging my sword and blocking with my shield, and that was about it. It played out as a red light, green light sort of situation, because if I swung while the enemy was blocking, it basically meant I was going to stagger, and while I do believe there should be some sort of punishment for swinging at the wrong time, quite often a stagger would end in me being stun locked, especially if there were multiple enemies beating on me at once. That's another thing that kind of bothered me. Dealing with multiple enemies was a mixed bag as well. There were times when I was getting ganked and it was definitely my fault, but some situations there were 3 or 4 enemies and they aggroed all at once, murdering me pretty quickly. The enemies also scale with the player's level, and there were certain times when it seems like the game increased in difficulty by a lot. Early game was very hard for me, mostly in terms of gaining money and the ability to use some magic items. Recharging magic items was too expensive, and the build I chose basically made it so that I never had the MP required to cast the soul capture spells. So I would use my magic items and then they would be useless for a little bit. Eventually I was able to cheese the money issue by taking up alchemy. I enjoyed the easy money, and it made checking chests, barrels, and other loot containers more rewarding, as Elder Scroll games put a ton of different useless items in the game for some reason. If the broom or silver bowl had a function like the junk items did in Fallout 4, I would have less of an issue, but I would rather open a chest with nothing in it than an item that has no function whatsoever. Wait, I take that back. They have a function of adding to the player's carry limit. So not only are they useless, they also have a negative impact. Thanks for that. Anyways, alchemy was also nice as a way to replenish potion stocks. I mainly only used potions that restored magic health or fatigue because of the fact that there were not enough hotbar slots to put on other potions. It would have been fun to apply poisons to my sword or arrows, but then I would have to enter the menu basically every time to do that, making the potential for a poisoner build to be more cumbersome than it would be worth. Combat with NPCs around was interesting to say the least. Those morons would run in like they downloaded the plot armor mod and immediately take dirt naps. That caused some problems with completing quests. I suppose I could have just accepted the fact that I left the bodies of the people I was supposed to save in the Deadlands, but I was mostly trying to roleplay being the good guy, you know, the actual hero of Cyrodiil. The way I had chosen to level and build my character also meant that I didn't have enough MP to cast healing spells on my companions. Luckily, I found out a little trick that if the player uses the wait function, the health of the NPC will return to full. It also seemed like most of the people I was supposed to be protecting had melee builds, which meant they'd jump right into the fray, usually deftly maneuvering themselves directly in front of my swinging blade. I can't count how many times I heard the agitated shout, "I'm on your side!" After I assaulted my allies, they would turn on me, quite often in the middle of battle, all because their movement put them in front of my strikes. A quick reload solved these issues, but if the autosave was in a bad moment or I hadn't saved manually in a while, it was an annoying loss of time. Now, staying with the combat of the game, it was sort of limited. Enemies really only had two combat paths: charge in with melee attacks or cast a spell and run, rinse and repeat. These two methods of offense were modified in minor ways like debuffs on the player or some buffs on themselves, but for the most part, they were of no consequence. I'll get into it more when I go into the story, but the final bosses of most of the questlines were very lackluster, and I wouldn't really say I was overgeared. I don't think I bought a single piece of enchanted gear from shops, nor did I do any enchanting on my own. With that being said, it seems like I stomped on most bosses or named characters. I'm not really sure if it's just the age of the game or the limitations of the engine, but it seems like the game was built more for the role-playing and questing aspects instead of the combat and gameplay. It just felt simple, and maybe that's because I had a simple build. Go into combat, swinging my sword, occasionally blocking to make sure that I didn't die, and that was about it. I really do think I missed out by not trying a magic build, and I'll definitely do that later on down the road when I play the game again in a couple of years. This game does have a few quirks, and anyone familiar with Bethesda games are used to it at this point, and I just want to touch on them briefly. I had an NPC with a key needed to unlock a door during a questline just launch into outer space for some reason.
What's up, homie?
You'll never take me down.
Whoa!
The game only crashed on me one time, so that wasn't too bad. But my biggest complaint is the lack of voice actors. It truly seems like only 3 voice actors and Sean Bean were hired to perform all of the lines in this game. I can only imagine how pricey it would have been considering every bit of dialogue is fully voiced, but the voice director really needed to do a better job. I'm personally not someone that'll talk about immersion being important because I'm dead inside and don't feel feelings.
Trust me.
But hearing the same voice from multiple different important NPCs was a little distracting. And I know I've said it before, but another thing I want to complain about is the menu. It was just so clunky and poorly organized. It probably took me 60 hours to realize what each different symbol on the magic tab meant, and that was because someone in Twitch chat told me. Then, like clockwork, the FBI agent watching me from my Xbox One console made it so the next loading screen info was related to the things I just learned. For the most part though, I don't have too many bad things to say about this game and its functions. The speech minigame is kind of ridiculous, and feels like it was shoehorned in instead of actually being thought out, but it wasn't intrusive and was hardly ever needed. And I say that as someone who played a character that finished the game with a personality score of 30, just like in my real life. I didn't utilize spellcrafting as I was playing a melee build, but I can imagine that it might be fun to play around with to optimize casting power. Enchanting seemed entirely useless, as quest rewards and other found items were capable of having multiple enchantments on at once, whereas the enchanting table only allowed one enchantment per item. I absolutely abhor durability in single-player games like this, but smithing was mostly unobtrusive, and it was occasionally funny when I was swinging my sword, only to have my weapon break and have the battle come down to a fistfight for a short moment. Now onto the story and quests. Easily my favorite part of Oblivion. I was having an interesting conversation while playing this game with a member of my chat. I was complaining about fetch quests, and I said how the quests in Oblivion didn't feel like fetch quests. We went back and forth for a little bit, and my whole point was that, at the end of the day, every task in every video game could fall under the definition of a fetch quest. Go here, kill thing, deliver item, return for reward. It's a pretty basic formula, but what set Oblivion apart in my eyes was the lore and the twists the quest took. It really seemed to me that the writers and developers were just having fun making up stories to put in the game. I also liked the rumor system. It was an interesting way to gather information, to hear folks gossip about their neighbors' troubles. To me, it's better than just seeing a marker on the minimap that the player goes to, just to tick another box and complete another errand. There were a few side quests that stood out to me. There was one where a famous painter was missing, and the player finds out that he was stuck inside one of his paintings. His talent comes from a brush that was created by Dibella, a deity, and the brush allows the wielder to go inside of paintings and paint things life-size just by imagining them. Unfortunately, a thief stole the brush and painted some trolls. Though by a twist of fate, the trolls murdered the thief. The player also gets turpentine as a poison to apply to their weapon, which, makes sense because turpentine's a paint remover. And it's needed because these trolls are formidable. I thought it was creative and quaint, adding a bit of whimsy to a game where a lot of quest lines are serious. Another side quest that's sticking in my mind is a 100% miserable fetch quest, but the set of circumstances that I encountered makes it funny to me. A farmer asked me to kill 5 bears that were attacking his sheep. So while I'm hunting my quarry, a bear gets close to his farm and he runs out there and fistfights the bear. He subsequently dies and I fail the quest. Nice. I reload my save and manage to kill the bears, and when I turn in the hides to claim my reward, he gave me a book that increased my hand-to-hand skill. Still a boring fetch quest, but funny to me considering how brawling worked out so well for the farmer the first time around. I also recommend the Order of Virtuous Blood and Knights of the Thorn side quests just because I think they were well written and the outcomes were enjoyable. There were quite a few more side quests that I enjoyed, but I don't want to wax poetic when I think any person would be best suited to experience the quest for themselves by playing the game. For the larger connected quest lines, there are 7 in total. The Arena, the Daedric Shrines, which I use the term connected loosely, the Fighters Guild, the Thieves Guild, the Mages Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, and the main story which deals with the Oblivion crisis. The quest lines range in their quality, but at the end of the day, I suppose that will largely come down to subjectivity. I'm going to do a quick overview and include some spoilers, but I can't stress this enough. I highly recommend this game and experiencing the stories it offers for yourself. I have mixed feelings about the Arena questline. There wasn't too much going on with the story of it, but I think it lends to the environmental storytelling best. I completed the Arena late in my playthrough, and most of the NPCs in the game are completely for the Empire and its regime. That being said, cultures that bask in the bloodletting of their fellow citizens are usually said to be in decline and coming to an end, and the Arena is in the Imperial capital. Another minor thing that led to the Empire being a bit dirtier underneath is one of the fights is against a trio of slaves that were forced into the Arena to battle for their freedom, whereas my character was there by choice for gold and glory. It was never dwelled on by the NPCs, but to me it was an interesting insight on the workings of the Empire. I did enjoy the main contact as he was just generally abrasive, but all about that combat life. There's a nice twist near the end too. The Grand Champion offers a quest to help him discover information about his lineage, and completing the quest makes the final fight of the Arena much easier, and quite sad. Granted, the player could ignore this quest and trade blows with the champ, but to me, that would make the Arena much less interesting. The Arena itself is a good way to make money, and that's about it. I would rank it as the worst questline, but that's only because I don't think it was meant to be much more than just a series of fights for gold. The Daedra Shrines aren't entirely connected, other than that the last shrine can only be unlocked when all the other shrines are completed, and they are mostly fetch quests. Go here and do thing, but what makes them interesting is the insight into the Daedra themselves. The main quest line involves the invasion by a Daedric prince, Mehrunes Dagon, but the other Daedra just seem like they mostly enjoy causing ruckus, with a few exceptions, instead of conquering Tamriel. Sanguine, for instance, has the player crash a dinner party and cast a spell that causes everyone to lose their clothes. Sanguine claims that they are too stuffy and need to loosen up a bit. It's ridiculous and quite funny when all the guests of the party start panicking. Granted, this quest gets you arrested, but it's worth it for the rewards. That's the other thing about the Daedric Shrine quest. the rewards are outstanding. Clavicus Vial led me to Umbra, an amazing soul capture sword. Azura rewarded me with the Dawnstar, an infinite grand soul gem that paired perfectly with Umbra, and Nocturnal gifted me with the skeleton key, an unbreakable lockpick which was much needed because I still don't really understand how the lockpicking minigame actually works. The rewards for the Daedra are exceptional, and any adventurer would be remiss if they passed up these legendary items. If for no other reason, they should be doing these quests for the rewards. There are 4 different guilds scattered throughout the realm, and the Fighters Guild might be the least entertaining of them all. The idea that they are a bunch of mercenaries means that you would get a job and complete it, the very definition of a fetch quest. The problem is the dialogue and story surrounding quests are just boring. I see what they tried to do, and while it followed a solid through line, the impact was lackluster. There's a rival mercenary guild called the Blackwood Company, and they're getting most of the jobs around town. This causes the Fighters Guild members to get lazy, defect, or drink and cause ruckus to pass the time. The player goes around and picks up the pieces, getting little tidbits of information about the other members of the guild and the Blackwood Company. A few quests are centered around the town of Harlan's Watch, and what I imagine was to get the player attached to the well-being of the town.
Just curing him to beat him to death. Just look at all that blood splatter.
Then, later on, when the player infiltrates the Blackwood Company in an attempt to bring them down, the player is forced to take part into an initiation that involves imbibing in the mysterious substance called Hiss Sap. The information that I was giving about this substance was minimal, but it basically causes hallucinations and frenzied behavior, and while I was under its influence, I murdered the villagers of Harlan's Watch.
Oh. I kind of remember this. They aren't goblins. The Hiss Sap was causing me to see goblins, and it was the people.
With this information, I go on a revenge tour to destroy the leadership of the Blackwood Company, and then I burn down the history sapling that was brought over from Black Marsh. All in all, the only quests that I found interesting were the last 2, when I took the Hiss Sap. Most of the time, it just seems like the Fighters Guild is a failing business and they're getting jealous. But it turns out that the Blackwood Company are the bad guys because of the bloodlust that is induced from the Hiss Sap. Either way, the player eventually becomes the leader because the previous leader was too sad about her sons dying, so she became lost in her grief to properly run the guild. The player has the option to return after a certain amount of time in game to collect a percentage of the Fighters Guild earning and gear, but there's so many other more lucrative options in the game that I can't imagine returning to any portions of the Fighters Guild once the questline is completed. The Thieves Guild is very interesting in concept and has some fun quests that lead up to the final act. The way that almost all of the quests seem to connect to each other is a very nice touch. My biggest complaint though is that new quests will only become available if the player has stolen items and sold them to the fences that become active when the player joins the guild. It's a solid idea in terms of showing that the player is committed to stealing, but in practice to me it just felt tedious. The quest starts off with an initiation, needing to steal an item first. I was too slow, and another hopeful recruit was able to steal the item before me, but I was able to steal it back from her. Quite fitting considering I was attempting to impress a thief. Either way, I started doing some other thefts. One where I steal tax records to give money back to the poor, and then a theft that would cause a particular Imperial Guard to be scrutinized for his obsession with catching the Grey Fox. After I proved my ability as a thief, I was able to work directly with the Grey Fox, the leader of the Thieves Guild. The player takes part in a couple of thefts, all that end up directly leading to a cool heist, stealing an Elder Scroll.
The only way for me to solve this crisis is to be Superman 4, the quest for peace.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
From the Imperial Library. I still don't know exactly what an Elder Scroll is, but it allows the Grey Fox to remove the Grey Cowl, a legendary item that used to belong to Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince. Apparently, Nocturnal placed a curse on it after it was stolen that erases the person wearing it from history. Apparently, the Elder Scroll removed the curse, so now the player can wear the cowl without it completely erasing their existence from the mind of everyone. The cowl is a cool reward, and if theft is something the player enjoys, it really helps having access to all of the fences throughout Cyrodiil. I don't know if my level was too high or if the gear I'd collected along my journey was too powerful, but most of the quests were a bit too easy. I would sneak, and I put sneak in quotations, past guards that were looking right at me. I think the idea of these heists and the entire questline had serious potential, but was definitely hindered by the game's mechanics. Maybe if I'd done the Thieves Guild first, it would have been more challenging, and therefore more enjoyable. I will say that the Mages Guild stepped it up in terms of story and execution. The path to join the guild is by getting recommendations from each of the satellite guild leaders in each of the cities. These quests are fun and interesting, with my favorite being the one where you are intentionally sent to your death. The player is asked to find a ring and, in turn, find another prospective member that has gone missing. However, the ring adds 150 points to the player's weight limit, and it's at the bottom of a well. You find that the other member is drowned, and the person that sent you on the quest was intentionally trying to kill you. What a jerk! But I guess you never can trust a reformed necromancer. There are some interesting errands that need to be run to get recommendations to be finally able to join the Imperial College at the capital. The overarching theme of the Mages Guild questline is destroying the last vestiges of necromancy in Cyrodiil. The quests that are given from the Imperial College are all related to finding info on the remaining necromantic factions in the area, but it also leads the player to finding out that the Count of Skingrad is a vampire and learning about black soul gems, which are the only way to trap a human soul. The Mages Guild in Bruma also gets attacked, and every member but one is murdered, and the reason why he was able to escape is nicely tied into the recommendation quest. The Archmage then sacrifices himself after the player finds out a way to finally kill Mannimarco, the King of Worms, a powerful necromancer that is on the rise and wants to destroy the Mages Guild. I mentioned it earlier about how bosses were mostly unsatisfying, and Mannimarco is a big reason why I say this. The fight against him is triggered after you speak with him, and because he's a mage, he's wearing a robe, and because I was a melee build, I had a sword. I cut through him like butter because of what I assume is his puny defense stat. It was immensely underwhelming. I was hoping he'd instantly summon a ton of minions for me to wade through, but the ending of the questline was abrupt, and while the whole of the questline was very well done, the ending fight left much to be desired. The rewards, however, the Mages Guild are very solid. The player gets access to an enchanting table and a spell creation table. They also gain access to a chest that duplicates alchemy ingredients. The Archmage's staff has some good abilities, and the Staff of Worms that you can loot off of Mannimarco's corpse allows the player to become a necromancer themselves, which I imagine would have paired insanely well with a more concentrated mage build like the Conjurer. Now into my absolute favorite questline, the Dark Brotherhood. It offers the most interesting and well-written characters in the game, and despite the fact that the player is a murderer and all of the brothers and sisters are complete sociopaths, they're mostly likable. I was initially approached by Lucien LeChance after I committed a murder. I was pretty shocked when he woke me up in the middle of the night after I went to sleep for a level up. He directs me to the Inn of Ill Omen to prove that I'm capable of being a serious member of the Dark Brotherhood. Apparently, my mark was hiding out at this inn and wasn't self-aware enough to know he should have left a long time ago. Oh well. I'm sure even Tamriel has a version of Darwin somewhere. Either way, after this, Lucien informs the player that he is a speaker of the Dark Brotherhood, one of the four fingers of the Black Hand, the leaders of the Dark Brotherhood. He then directs the player to Cheydinhal, which has already had hints of corruption and knowledge of the existence of the Dark Brotherhood here, and he gives you the secret password to enter the guild hall, thereby completing the creepy, weird cult starter kit, sans the Kool-Aid mix packets.
How can this be for the greater good? Shut it!
Upon entering, the player is greeted like a beloved family member, being seen for the first time in many years, which is oddly refreshing considering a lot of the citizens of Tamriel were quite rude towards me most of the game. Granted, I wouldn't trust a random stranger either, but I digress. You also get a cool outfit that seriously boosts the more nefarious skills, and it's all black and edgy.
Praise Sithis for this armor. Are you kidding me? Oh. Yeah.
There is only one Dark Brotherhood member that is less than happy to see me, and it's the Khajiit mage that is also the guild's merchant. I'll come back to that shortly. All of the other members have really interesting personalities, despite the way they all mention how they worship the Night Mother and Sithis. There's the Argonian Shadow Scales, the Jason Bournes of the Black Marsh, the Orc that doesn't care about the religion and just wants to kill, the kindly vampire that eventually offers to afflict the player with vampirism, Antoinetta, who is full-on insane, an elf I never dealt with much because she keeps a schedule scouting locations, and Schemer. Aw, such a good boy. The player then starts getting contracts, and it's fun to complete the optional challenges not only because the rewards are nice, but also because it added something to the quest that wasn't just go murder and complete. Dropping the antlers on the mark in Bruma was bittersweet, as the way of killing was interesting, but that satisfaction is blunted by the sadness of his handler, swapping medicine with poison, helping someone fake their death to get out of debt, and a murder mansion scenario where the player kills all the guests secretly, one by one. To me, the developers were really flexing their creative muscles with these quests, especially because the player gets used to not knowing who's asking for the murder to be done. There are little hints during and after the quest of who might have beckoned for the aid of the Dark Brotherhood, but it's mostly left to speculation. It gives the player incentive to explore more of of the world, and even though all of the information is delivered via dialogue, it still feels like a show, not tell version of storytelling, which to me is usually the superior method. These contracts are the first half of the Dark Brotherhood, and during this portion, there are whispers that a traitor is in the guild. Lucian asks the player to perform the ancient rite, the purification. I have to go kill all the members in Cheatenhall. If I wasn't specifically avoiding the naughty swears in this video, this is the place where I would do it. By the 9! What makes it even worse is everyone is fully warmed up to the player at this point because of how effective they have been at completing contracts. Even the Khajiit apologizes for being a salty mud crab. Ah!
There you are. Look,
Oh,
I've been thinking, and
damn it.
I guess I just want to say I'm sorry for the way I've treated you in the past. I mean, look at you. The things you've accomplished. You've obviously proven yourself a valuable member of this sanctuary. So let's start over, shall we? I know from now
He's
on,
like doing the
you
whole
and I are
damn
going
thing
to be
too.
great friends.
At this point, you might be thinking I've spent too much time talking about the Dark Brotherhood because I've spent longer on this than I have on any of the other ones, but it was so enjoyable that I'm just going to keep going. Lucian now promotes the player to be his personal assassin and says that all contracts will be picked up at dead drops. He also gives the player a nightmare steed, which would have been cool if horse riding wasn't so awful. Either way, I started doing all these dead drop quests, and I kind of thought it was a repeating quest section because it was very fetch questy. However, it goes on for a while, and eventually the player is stopped by Lucian, who's quite furious. Apparently, I've been murdering remaining Dark Brotherhood members and even got to the listener, the only person that can converse with the Night Mother. The contracts at one of the dead drops was swapped, and then I was following the orders of someone else. This supposedly can be gleaned by a discerning reader if the contracts are read at all. I'll be honest here, I messed up. Upon picking up the dead drops, the next quest would flag with the accompanying map marker. So I just went out and did some killing. This is my only complaint about the Dark Brotherhood. I wish it was required to open the letter before the quest flag, incentivizing me to actually read the notes. I know that I should have, but for whatever reason, I didn't. Regardless of my stupidity, Lucian's personal assassin has killed basically the entirety of the Dark Brotherhood. Whoops. However, we have a lead on the actual traitor, and Lucian begs me to capture this person before the rest of the Black Hand gets a hold of him. I track down the traitor's location to the Imperial Lighthouse, and his room is ridiculous. Blood, gore, bodies, and a unique item disturbingly named Mother's Head. After reading his diary, which was amazingly written, we have the proof to save Lucian and find the real traitor. When we return to tell Lucian the good news, we arrive to his naked body hanging from the ceiling, tortured and killed by the Black Hand. Funnily, if you grab Mother's Head and then dropped it on the floor and talk to everyone, one of them will react in their dialogue, marking him as the traitor. A very easily missed detail that is quite nice. Either way, we go to meet the Night Mother, who is housed in Breville. Of course, the evil murder queen would be in this dump, and the traitor reveals himself after the Night Mother arrives and kills all but one of the Black Hand. I deal with the traitor, and I'm rewarded by being named the new listener. Oddly, the Night Mother said she knew about the traitor all along, but allowed it to occur. It's odd that a worshipped being would allow her most devout to be utterly destroyed, adding more to the mystique of the Dark Brotherhood. We get some excellent new gear, even though it's just a robe, and then have completed the Dark Brotherhood. Honestly, I know I rambled on about this questline for a little bit, but I haven't done it justice either. Easily the best questline in terms of writing, characters, and rewards. 10 out of 10, definitely recommend. Would kill the entire guild again. Now it's finally time for me to talk about the Oblivion part of the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. The main questline focuses on the main gimmick of this game, the Oblivion Gates. And I'll talk about those in just a moment, so let me set the stage. I started out as a prisoner in the Imperial jail cell, which is kind of an interesting start. A hero coming from a position of less than 0. Some guards and the Emperor himself come down and use a secret passage that is attached to my cell. They allow me to go with them for some reason instead of closing the door behind them, but I won't nitpick too much. This is basically the tutorial section of the game. The action really starts when some folks from the Mythic Dawn attack, and I find out that they are actively trying to assassinate the Emperor. Before they succeed in killing the Emperor, he asks the player to deliver the Amulet of Kings to his illegitimate son. To get things started, the player must travel to Waynon Priory to deliver the amulet to Joffrey, the Grand Master of the Blades, the Emperor's sworn protectors. After speaking with the Grand Master, we are directed to Kvatch to find Martin, the heir to the throne of the Empire. However, when we arrive, there is a makeshift camp outside of the city. Come to find out, an Oblivion Gate opened at the city doors and is sieging the place, killing basically everyone and destroying the whole place. We tell the guard we're going in and hop into the Oblivion Gate. Now here's the main hook of the game, entering the realm of Oblivion. Oblivion is a different plane of existence, and the one we are heading to is the Deadlands. It's generally an interpretation of Christian hell, if I had to guess. It's barren, full of lava, jagged rocks and mountains, dead of all living things other than dangerous plants and Daedric beings. In the distance are gigantic black towers with burning reddish lights at their pinnacle that are reminiscent of Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. At first, it's an intimidating place, and to close these gates into Tamriel, the player must climb the tower to the top and remove the source of power, a sigil. We close the gate, the head of the guard rejoices, but there's still work to be done. We storm the city, clearing out the remaining Daedra, and enter the Temple of Akatosh, which is a nice touch considering the Septim bloodline, to find the monk Martin Septim, the next emperor. We bring Martin back to the Waynon Priory to speak to Joffrey, only to find that some members of the Mythic Dawn are attacking. We dispatch them and save the Priory members. Unfortunately, they were able to steal the Amulet of Kings. We then decide to head to Cloud Ruler Temple, an ancient blade stronghold. Martin is still coming to terms with the tumultuous time he just had. You know, what with his home getting utterly demolished by Daedra, finding out he is in line to be in charge of the Empire, and that he now has a small legion of dedicated guards at his beck and call with the blades. He steps up and addresses his protectors, and accepts his role, beginning to make plans to stop the Mythic Dawn and the Oblivion crisis. There are some quests to track down some spies and grab a couple books that will lead the player to the Mythic Dawn's hideout, which are mostly busy work even though the information about the Mythic Dawn is provided. So, what is the Mythic Dawn? Well, they're a bunch of morons. Why would anyone want to help the Daedric Prince of Disaster and Destruction, Mehrunes Dagon, lead his legions into the world? It seems like Mancor Cameron was manipulated into meddling in the affairs of deities and fancied himself some sort of divine power broker. It's kind of wild. But how did he gain followers in his endeavor? That is answered later on in the questline. Either way, we infiltrate their secret Dagon shrine and break up a party by stealing a book, the Mysterium Xarxes. Unfortunately, Cameron teleports to Paradise. This book is basically the method of heading to Paradise to retrieve the Amulet of Kings that Cameron brought with him. We bring the book to Martin, and he can read its unusual symbols somehow. All that we really get is that, in his youth, he was a goth kid. I don't know. I wish they would have delved into it a little more, and it might have been in books and such, but I must have missed those. To head into Paradise, we need to complete some fetch quests so Martin can create the portal. We need a Daedric Artifact, the Blood of a Divine, a Great Welkenstone, and a Great Sigil Stone. The Daedric Artifact one is interesting, because most of the Daedric Shrine quest rewards are very powerful, and the only one that I could stomach getting rid of was a hammer from Malakath, because I wasn't going with a blunt two-handed build, even though the hammer has a paralyze effect that is extremely rare. The Blood of the Divine one was fun because we found some armor that belonged to Tiber Septim, who was turned into the god Talos, the origin of the Septim Empire. The quest is cool as the catacombs are cursed, and I freed some spirits, fairly standard dungeon diving at this point in the game, but the lore surrounding the tombs just keeps adding to the Elder Scrolls universe. The Great Welkenstone is straight a fetch quest and is kind of boring, easily the worst quest in the questline. Sort of. During the material gathering, the player is asked to assist the city of Bruma in closing an Oblivion gate. From intelligence gathered from spies, we learn that a great gate, similar to the one that destroyed Kvatch, is planning on being opened on Bruma's doorstep. Now, there is an optional quest called Allies for Bruma. I don't know what else to say about this quest. It's tedious. This requires the player to go to each city to garner military support from their leaders. The leaders say they can't help with the Oblivion gates that are close to their cities. If the Oblivion gates weren't awful, this quest would be better, because logically it makes sense that a leader couldn't send forces somewhere else when the place that they're in charge of is also under assault. But the Oblivion gates are just so samey and boring after about 2 of them. I know this quest is optional, but being my first time playing, I wanted to essentially unite the province of Cyrodiil under the single banner of Martin Septim and stopping the Oblivion crisis. It felt thematically required. So we all want the Great Gate to be open because that's the only way to get a Great Sigil Stone, the last piece of the puzzle that will allow us to enter Paradise. The cutscene for the start of this is pretty cool. We get Martin doing the rallying speech in front of the soldiers preparing to hold the line while the player jumps into hell. A few gates open up, spilling Daedra into the world as the opening assault, and then the Great Gate is spawned, and a gigantic siege engine starts working its way towards Bruma. I really like this. Felt like some serious business was going down. The Great Gate is a bit different from other gates because this one has a time limit to get the Sigil Stone. Fortunately, the time limit made it interesting because all I wanted to do was sprint through it anyhow, because after doing the gates to gain allies, I was completely over hanging out in the Deadlands. Anyway, we grab the stone, save Bruma, and prepare to create the portal to Paradise. At this point for me was something really sad. Joffrey and Boris died defending Bruma here. Rip in peace, my brother Blades. rip in peace. With all of the required items in hand, Martin creates the portal and we head into Paradise. Paradise is exactly what you would think. It's very beautiful. Flowers and flora are everywhere, and it contains a ton of materials for alchemy, including ambrosia and liquor from the mana bloom flowers, which make it very easy to make good health and magicka potions. You meet a guy and find out that he sort of regrets joining the Mythic Dawn, because they were promised immortality here in Paradise. The problem is that they are tortured by Daedra, and when they are killed, they just respawn for some more torture. Not really what they were expecting. The folks around the area all basically say the same thing, and that it's impossible to escape without some special wristbands. There are some options here whether or not to kill or assist Daedra, and then to help or kill one of Mancor Cameron's minions during the escape. Honestly, it seemed like none of it really mattered. However, we get the wristbands so we can get let into the club and make our way to Cameron. We meet up with Cameron's 2 children, who we killed earlier in the questline, and confront all 3 of them at once. The interesting part about this fight is the kids, being permanent fixtures of Paradise now, will respawn if they are killed. However, we beat up on Mancor Cameron, who, like all the other final bosses, is wearing a robe, so he gets sliced like warm butter. The player grabs the Amulet of Kings, and Paradise collapses in on itself, and we escape. Interesting enough, only people with the bloodline stemming from Tiber Septim can wear the amulet. And when we see Cameron, he has it around his neck. And when the player tries to put it on in the menu, they can't wear it. Very nice detail here. After bringing the amulet back to Martin, who I forgot to mention is voiced by Sean Bean, and I could listen to that dude talk for days. Anyways, with Amulet in tow, we decide to head to the Imperial City to declare him as Emperor and to also light the Dragon Fires, which will stop the Oblivion Gates from being able to be opened. While speaking with the head honcho, Mehrunes Dagon himself enters into Tamriel with many Oblivion Gates opening inside the Imperial City. I failed a couple times here because Martin was killed by some Daedra. Granted, I didn't really know that enemies were infinite, and based on previous experience with NPC followers, I just assumed Martin would attack everything in sight. Either way, the plan of action is to sprint to the temple to relight the dragon fires. At this point, Dagon breaks down the temple walls, and to combat this deity, Martin transforms into a fiery spectral dragon, and the 2 engage in combat, with Dagon being defeated and Martin being taken by his transformation. The Empire is saved, but also in turmoil as they're left without a leader. It's mildly explained that Martin channeled the deity Akatosh to fight the dragon, but that's about it. And that's the end of the main quest line. So that's it. Everything's covered at this point in terms of content of the game, and I've made my feelings about certain aspects pretty clear, I'd say. Obviously, I didn't cover every single quest or portion of the main quest lines, or every possible build, because there's just so much content, and I really do think it would be best for people to experience things on their own. I'm literally a no one on the internet, and why would you even care what I think, even if you did make it this far in the video? But is The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion a good game? Unequivocally, yes. I have some issues with the combat limitations and the severe lack of interesting boss mechanics and some of the vagueness of the game's leveling mechanics, but other than that, the game plays well. I did encounter some wonky AI and small bugs, but considering how large the game is, nothing made it completely unbearable to me. The stories were mostly solid and enjoyable. The quests were written well, and the twists and turns that took place made the game feel like a lot of care was put into the story and characters. I will say the method of storytelling leaves some things to be desired, and this is because a lot of the background information and lore is only to be found in the plethora of books littering the world. In my youth, I would have spent the hours needed hunting down the books, collecting them, and reading every line. But now that I'm an old-timer, I don't really have the patience for that type of stuff anymore. I will say though, the lore and attention to detail in the lore makes me really wish I would have played this game when I was younger and still had the ability to experience passion for something. While I'm not going to talk about any of the DLC, I did play the Shivering Isles DLC on the recommendation of some friends, and I highly suggest that anyone who can play that as well. It felt like another large portion of game and had Shia Gorath, my favorite character out of everybody. Definitely worth the price point. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to play Oblivion if you haven't already. It's vastly superior to Skyrim. Don't at me. This game does have a few quirks. There are 4 different guilds scattered. I really do think I missed out by not doing a magic build, and I'll definitely try that later down the road when I visit the fuck.